Hello, and welcome to part 2 of my climate change trilogy. In part 1, I went over some of the reasons why I side with 97% of all climatologists regarding climate change. Some of the reasons why climatologists can put out zingers like, we are more sure that greenhouse gas is causing climate change than we are that smoking causes cancer. And fun segue, the tobacco industry is going to come up a couple of times here because they also systematically funded denial and doubt, and that's what part 2 is about. How your doubt in just about any evidence you've ever seen or heard contrary to man-made climate change was funded by someone with a non-science agenda. I'm still going to keep everything focused on the South, the Bible Belt, so here are the most common doubts and misconceptions I see, specifically down here. Okay, so the most common misconception I run into is that we may be experiencing climate change, but that the events are part of a natural cycle and not man-made. We kind of covered this earlier, but like I said, there's about a 0.0006% chance of that. And even if we're not just talking about present-day emissions, even if we go back 400,000 years with ice core samples, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and global temperature go hand in hand. Now, this graph and this correlation has been talked about before by denialists. Some say that the temperature rise happens before the carbon rise, showing that the correlation is reversed. But as I'll discuss later, there are positive feedback loops that begin to happen as temperature rises that force more carbon into the air. So temperature rising would put more carbon and methane into the air, which rises the temperature, etc. Positive feedback loop. So if you look at this graph for a while, you start to see that there's this pattern where each of these spikes is about 100,000 years apart from each other. This is called a Milankovitch cycle. It's caused primarily due to the partially eccentric elliptical nature of our planet's orbit. To put that in simpler terms, some years our Earth comes closer to the Sun than other years. So when I was looking this up, even I was like, well, this means we're at the part where things are supposed to get warmer, right? So I had to look into this a bit deeper, because even the guy who wrote the paper on this was saying, just based on these cycles, we should be seeing cooling for the next 20,000-ish years. Turns out, if you zoom in on the graph, you can see that the predicted warming spike did occur, and it happened about 8,000 years ago. So we would normally be heading into a cooling period without all this extra carbon we're pumping into the air anyways. And boy, have we pumped a lot of carbon into the air. I've heard some people say that volcanoes put out way more carbon into the atmosphere than humans, but the truth is the opposite. Volcanoes put out about 0.2 billion tons of carbon into the air annually, while humans put out 38 billion tons in 2017. So the humans are putting out up to 190 times what volcanoes are putting out every year. That number is so staggering, I'm going to need to use pictures to explain how absolutely monstrous it is. If we put all the humans on Earth together on a scale, that would only be 0.06 gigatons. We emitted the weight of 633 times the entirety of humanity in 1 year. 19 times the weight of all animal life, period, per year. So that's why, when you look at the green line in the graph here, and it jumps all the way into the other graph, it's because the atmosphere has 30% more carbon in it than we've ever seen for 400,000 years. We've gone from peaking at 300 to holding steady at 415 parts per million. Next, we have a similar misconception, that climate change is always fluctuating, so maybe these past few years have just been unusually warm. But that's mostly due to a failure to even understand how things are measured. So the last 5 years have been the hottest 5 years ever recorded, back to back. But the part people don't realize is that that's not weather. Weather is measured in numbers like negative 50 degrees to positive 150 degrees, or more. That's a huge range. That includes a range from dead from cold to dead from heat. Climate change is measured in single-digit degrees Celsius. So the hottest year ever recorded, as far as climate is concerned, was 2016. And that year was only 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit over the pre-industrial baseline set in 1880 to 1910. When you think about it like that, it sounds like nothing, right? You might not even notice a 2-degree change in a room's temperature. But it's like a person having a fever. Just a 2-degree fever means your internal temp is 100 degrees, and that's an issue. It just goes to show how sensitive some of these systems are. Moreover, it means we're halfway to some of the apocalyptic scenarios we'll be seeing if this trend continues. I won't be getting to the impact of climate change until part 3 of this trilogy, so hold on for that. Now, let's get to the not-so-innocent misconceptions. The ones someone paid a think tank to produce and market because that's what will help line their pocket. The cost to everyone else be damned. I mean, it's no secret that companies do this, so I wonder why it's so hard to believe that one of the most profitable industries in the world, an industry that can literally rise nations out of sand and obscurity to the world level, why people would not believe that an industry like that is putting obscene levels of money into confusing and misdirecting the dialogue on clear science that's been understood for a century and confirmed for a decade. But how do we know they misdirected everyone? Well, we have some convenient company memos. These actually got picked up by quite a few news sources after the initial discovery, but let's take a look at this one by The Guardian. As we can see here, we've got a chart listing atmospheric carbon dioxide parts per million, the year, and we are right about 415 parts per million. It's right about here. The average temperature is about 0.9 to 1 degree Celsius over pre-industrial level. So we fall right in the center of what they predicted in, was it 1982? So they got that right 40 years ago. That's pretty accurate. It's almost like this is following some kind of exact science where we can pretty well predict what the temperature is going to be based off the carbon in the atmosphere. Not that shocking, given that ExxonMobil and Shell are companies with some of the best scientists in regards to what happens when you burn oil and coal. Just because they don't tell you what's going to happen doesn't mean they don't know what's going to happen. So let's read this word for word for a little bit. Later that decade, in 1988, an international report by Shell projected similar efforts, but also found that CO2 could double even earlier, by 2030. Privately, these companies did not dispute the links between their products, global warming, and ecological calamity. On the contrary, their research confirmed these connections. Shell's assessment foresaw 1 meter sea level rise and noted that warming could also fuel disintegration of the West Antarctic ice sheet, resulting in a worldwide rise in sea level of 5 to 6 meters. That would be enough to inundate entire low-lying countries. And remember, 1 meter is about 3 feet, and 3 feet does cause some really serious flooding. Shell's analysts also warned of the disappearance of specific ecosystems or habitat destruction, predicted an increase in runoff, destructive floods, and inundation of low-lying farmland, and said that new sources of fresh water would be required to compensate for changes in precipitation. Global changes in air temperature would also drastically change the way people live and work. All told, Shell concluded the changes may be the greatest in recorded history. For its part, Exxon warned of potentially catastrophic events that must be considered. Like Shell's expert, Exxon scientists predicted devastating sea level rise and warned that American Midwest and other parts of the world could become desert-like. Looking on the bright side, the company expressed its confidence that this problem is not as significant to mankind as nuclear holocaust or world famine. I think a toddler could make his way over that bar. I think a document makes for frightening reading, and the effort is all the more chilling in the view of oil giants' refusal to warn the public about the damage that their own researchers predicted. Shell's report, marked confidential, was first disclosed by Dutch news organization earlier this year. Exxon's study was not intended for external distribution either. It was leaked in 2015. So they managed to hold on to those documents for quite some time, which is actually kind of impressive. Next, we have the root of all evil. Just plain old money. And in this case, it's not even hard to track. You could probably figure that oil companies spend a lot when lobbying, but I bet if you take a guess at how much, you would come up short by tens of millions of dollars. Let's just take a look at what they're spending according to OpenSecrets.org. The numbers fluctuate based on who's considered an oil company. I mean, Forbes includes gas stations, and when you do that, the numbers double. But at the very minimum, they are spending 100 million plus a year. And let's face it, you don't need 100 million on lobbying every year unless you're trying to lie or to just outright buy some politicians. Now, look at just where this graph jumps up. Obama comes into office in 2008, and what happens? Oil lobbying goes way up. Year 2 of Obama, it's double what it was the year before he was in. If oil companies don't like how things are looking, they just pump out obscene money until politicians look the other way. Not even Obama so much as scratched the subsidies oil companies get. Now, to be fair, let's see what we see from alternative energy production and services. Essentially, they don't really exist on a political scale until about 07 or 08. And for some reason, 09 was just a big lobbying year for everyone. 34 million from alternative energy, and just 175 million from oil and gas. So just about every year we go along here, oil and gas is spending 5 times what alternative energy production is spending. Even I was actually a little surprised to see 25 million is kind of where things are settling for them. But still, that's not got a whole lot on the over 100 million annually that oil and gas is putting out. You know what? Frankly, there are just more lies and cherry-picked data sets out there than I could ever possibly get to one by one. I'm not even going to get into how we've eliminated 3 Texases worth of rainforest, released all that carbon, created a plastic island twice the size of Texas, so of course we have the power to change the global temperature by 1 single degree Celsius. I challenge you right now, put it in the comments below why you think climate change isn't happening, and I will cut through your reasoning with the white-hot knife of science. This has stopped being the sort of topic we have the time to sit around and leisurely debate. The time for action was a decade ago, and these chemicals sit in the atmosphere for a century. If I can convince even one of you to write to your senators or congressmen to take some kind of action, this whole project will be worth it. Like, comment, subscribe, but more importantly, do something.